I thought I was done with this project, but unfortunately when I got the set back together I discovered that the picture doesn't fill the screen vertically. There's about a ½ inch gap up at the top. There is a control on the back vertical height, but that's as far as it goes, and there's still a gap up there. Ideally I'd like to have it so that it fills the screen vertically with the controls like in the mid position. So I'll pop it back open and do a little more checking. Hopefully it's nothing too serious. I've got the set popped open again, and I'm checking this height control. The center wiper on this potentiometer is supposed to be 410 volts. However, when I check it with my VTVM, I'm getting like 380, plus that needle's pulsating a bit, which makes me think that it's not being filtered properly. Where that voltage is generated is off of the flyback, actually. It's a boost voltage. So remember, the set runs on 255. Comes out of that voltage doubler. Well, some of the circuits need a little bit more voltage, so what they do is they tap into the flyback, which generates about 8,000 volts for the picture tube, and they call it a boost voltage. And that comes up here and goes into the yoke, amongst other things. So perhaps this cap isn't wired in properly, or, well, who knows. Could be this cap here. I think that's the main filter cap for this supply. So you check on that. It's that 10 microfarad 500 volt cap that I replaced. I'm going to get a scope on it too and see if there really is some ripple on it. I've got my scope hooked up, and oh yeah, there's a lot of ripple on that. 2 volts per division, so I got about 8 volts of ripple. I don't think that's right. So, I gotta check those capacitors. Well, I think I found the problem. This 6800 ohm 1 watt resistor is actually measuring 8,000 ohms. So, got a replacement right here I'll pop in. Unfortunately, to get to it, I have to take the whole picture tube out again, so kind of annoying. So I figure while I've got it back open, I'm going to double check every single resistor to make sure there aren't any others that are badly out of tolerance. Working on this set is getting really frustrating. I replaced that resistor, which didn't bring the voltage up, and I got full vertical height for a while. Then the picture and sound got staticky, then they disappeared altogether, just had a white raster. No sound, no video. So I took the set apart and started poking and going over stuff and checking tubes and replacing tubes and so on and so forth. Still haven't quite figured out the problem completely, but I did just discover that this ceramic disc capacitor is loose on one end. And what do you suppose this goes to? Well, the other end, that's still connected, goes to a green wire, which goes right to the center of the volume pot. So I think that explains why I've got no sound. So I'll re-tack that on. Then I've been going through figuring why there's no video. I've tried using my B&K 1077B and injecting signals at various points, and I'm just getting absolutely no video whatsoever. I tried going everything from the antenna inputs to the IF, which is clearly labeled right here, all the way down to injecting a video signal right in the grid of the video output tube, and nothing. So, still struggling with that, but at least when I solder this cap back on, I'm going to power it back up and hopefully I'll get sound. Well, it took me a few hours, but I think I finally found the problem with the video and why it went out. Buried down in here, hiding underneath this coil, is a resistor. And that resistor is this guy, which supplies 130 volts to the second video IF stage. And it appears to have discolored a bit and cracked. I'll get that coil out, I'll unsolder this leg and pull it up, and I'll get a better look at that. But if that is the problem, and it was burning out while I was working on the set, that would explain why things were kind of crackling, and then the video went out altogether, because if this goes out, I lose power to the second stage, and the sound and video are picked off right after that stage. So this goes out, no sound, no picture. Oh yeah, that resistor's bad. Broken right in half. I guess it just had enough life left for the couple weeks I've been working on this set, and it finally just gave up. So I got that coil out of the way, and I'll tack a new resistor in and put this set back together again, and see if it works now. Alright, I replaced the resistor, soldered that cap back on, got it all back together, so let's give this another try. Got raster, got video, got sound. Alright, so right back where I left off. So now the point of this was I wanted to see if I could get the vertical to be any better. So let's see. That's the vertical height control. Sometimes when you adjust the vertical height and the linearity and so on, all these controls interact, and it can mess up the vertical sync. So we just adjust that, and you kind of go back and forth. All right, got full height. Sweet. Cool, so now the picture extends fully from the top to the bottom. It's cut off a little on the right, but I think that's because the picture tube isn't mounted quite firmly. I just have it kind of floating in the chassis. There's also some centering controls on the neck of the CRT. I don't know what cartoon this is, but it's CGI and it's pretty high quality, and it looks really good on this set, I think. Alright, so next up, I had to replace this piece of metal. This is what actually holds the CRT firmly in place. And I want to get this all firmly seated and then get that picture centered, and then dig out a test pattern generator and adjust all the fine-tuning controls properly, and then I'll put it back in the cabinet. I'm doing a bit of cleaning on the chassis before I put it back in the cabinet. I cleaned off the high voltage cage. It was a bit rusty on top, and it was fairly dirty on the other surfaces. So what I did was take some navel jelly and Q-tips and remove the rust, and then I gave the rest of the cage a wipe down with the same navel jelly, because not only does it remove rust, but it's actually quite good at cleaning metal. Over the years, dust that settles on this kind of really sticks to it, I think, because of the heat generated inside, and this stuff cleans it off quite nicely. Once it was clean, I wiped it down with WD-40 to leave a bit of an oil film on it to hopefully prevent any further corrosion. And then finally, if you're really crazy like me, you might want to clean the wiring. This early plastic wiring, for some reason, gets kind of sticky with age, and dust and dirt really sticks to it. So much so that sometimes you can't even tell what color the wires are. Like this wire is actually supposed to be white down here. A couple ways you can clean it. One, you can use something like a multi-purpose degreaser cleaner, and maybe a bit of paper towel or a Q-tip and go back and forth, and eventually it'll come off. Or, if you want to do it quickly, use a solvent like lacquer thinner. It's fairly aggressive stuff. It's got fumes, but it removes this really well and does not harm the plastic insulation. So just get the end of this damp and dip the Q-tip in the lacquer thinner and then just carefully go over it. And just like that, you get a nice clean wire. And all the cruds on the Q-tip. I like doing this especially on sets where the schematic indicates the color coding for the wire. Makes it much easier to trace out. For example, in this set, I believe all the red wires are the 255 volt line, and I think the yellow is the 150, and so on. So when you can really see those colors better, makes it a lot easier to trace out the wiring. I got the chassis back in the cabinet. Now I'm carefully lining everything up. Got the screen on and fairly well centered, and then I've made a lot of care to make sure that the controls were centered in the holes, because the last thing you want is to have the shafts on the controls rubbing against the cabinet. And now I'm carefully screwing the cabinet, or the chassis, onto the cabinet. I got it overhanging off my workbench, makes it easier to be able to line up where the screws go in and be able to get at these. Sometimes I think maybe having a table or a workbench with like a hole cut out in the middle would be really handy, because these things are often so heavy and you can't really tilt them on their side, certainly not upside down. So I've just found that the easiest way is to hang it over the edge of a table or workbench if at all possible while lining things up. Some of these screw heads are kind of grungy. These are the ones that go into the carrying handle, so they're fairly visible because they go right on top of the set. Well, an easy way to clean these up is to take a abrasive pad like this and just rub them around. And then if you want to go a step further, use some metal polish on them. Get them nice and clean and shiny. There we go, that's better. There's another one I've done. Certainly better than this grungy one that I haven't done. I was trying to screw on the handle and I just could not get this screw to find any purchase, so I took the front off, and then I realized what I'd forgotten to do was put this clip back on, because there's just a hole here, it's not threaded or anything. So make sure you save all the bits and pieces and take photographs so you know how to put things back together properly. So now the screw will bite into that. Here's the set all back together and playing. Still have a little bit of issue with the vertical. I got some fold over down here at the bottom. I basically have a choice of either having the picture not fill it up at the very top, or filling it up at the top and getting fold over at the bottom. So a little more tweaking, I think, and I'll get it perfect. Otherwise it's playing really, really well. Here's what the cabinet looks like, all back together, cleaned up as best I could. For a signal source, I'm going through a balun to convert it from 300 to 75 ohms, and I'm going through this cable to my new Comcast digital converter box. Up until a couple weeks ago, I had analog cable, and I could have plugged this cable right into that balun and then use the channel clunker to go through channels 2 through 13. Unfortunately, now I got to keep this on channel 3 and use this little box. or use my blonder tongue modulator transmitter as I've shown in other videos. One last thing. The cabinet looks okay, but it's definitely some paint loss here and there, and it's fairly rusty inside. Well, I was at Menards the other day, and I checked out their paint. At first, I had chosen some paint that would have been far too orange, but I'm glad I brought a friend along. Before we left, I had him look at this set and said, remember this shade of orange, and help me pick one out. And he talked me into buying this, which I thought looked far too red, but it turns out that he was right. That's actually a very, very good match. I was a little put off because this is for engine enamel, for painting like an engine block and rated for 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The set gets warm, but not that warm. And I wasn't sure how this would stick to the cabinet, or what kind of a smooth finish this would produce, or how it would look. So I took an Arizona iced tea can that I had lying around, and I painted it. And let it sit for a week, as it turns out the cure time for this is a full 7 days. I also got clear, so after this I put some clear coat on it. And I'm happy to report that not only does it look really good, but this is the toughest finish I have ever encountered coming out of a spray can. I can scratch this really hard with my fingernails and I can't put a mark on it. I've been pretty disappointed with some other paints like this Painter's Touch stuff. Not at all a tough finish. Unfortunately, they don't have an off-white to go with this, so I'm going to try using something like this Ivory Bisque off-white, and then clear coat it with this, which should provide a nice tough finish. I'll have to do some tests to make sure that this is compatible with coating this, because I've had some bad experiences in the past when mixing different types of paint where they curdle and react really badly. But I will save this little painting experiment for sometime in the not too distant future, I hope. When I do work on this, what I'm going to try to do is use electrolysis to not only remove the rust but also remove the paint. To do that, though, I'll have to get some kind of big tub to submerge this whole cabinet into. So that should be an interesting project. Maybe I'll get to it this summer. Otherwise, that is it for the Admiral T102 Restoration project. Hope you enjoyed it.